Okay, Kinesiology 223. This is chapter 20. We're still talking athletic injuries and psychology. With presentation number 5 here, we're talking about identifying athletes and exercisers who are at risk of injury. Some of this will be a retread. We've talked a little bit about some of this, but we'll go ahead and go through these 10 slides and get this done. All right, communication is key as it is with everything. Um, when a person is injured, you have to be able to build some kind of rapport with that person. Now, granted, we're talking about a scenario where you're building rapport, but I will tell you, if you're an athletic trainer, you've probably already built rapport with your athletes before the injury. If you're a personal trainer and you're working with clients and that client becomes injured, you have an entire body of work and have probably built rapport with that person as well. So that part is not such a big issue, right? Because you're already going to have that in place. Um, but you have to be able to exhibit some empathy, right? And really show that like you understand how the injured person feels. I mean, and I wouldn't suggest this. I wouldn't say, gosh, your knee replacement. I know just how you feel. Gosh, I broke my finger one time playing a sport. They're not related. That's not empathetic. That's just you trying to basically commandeer the conversation and make it about you. You have to be able to have an empathetic persona when you're talking with somebody who's injured and be able to show empathy towards a person, but not take over the conversation. Um, just and especially if you're talking with an athlete who's losing their identity, like I can relate to that because I had a little bit of that when I was in college, but I can tell you I'm several decades removed from that, right? So somebody who just injures themselves today, even though I have been through that very process, I wouldn't relate to that person who just got injured on the field today. Maybe in a week or so, sure, I can have that conversation. But at that moment, to have a conversation to say, I know just how you feel, give it a couple days. Let that person go through the curve of disbelief, frustration, anger, confusion, and let them go through the whole process of denial, and then go ahead and have a conversation with them going forward. And you may have to, if you've never been injured or never been in that situation, you may just have to sit patiently, listen, and be able to have a conversation with a person about their injuries. Now, with the process, and I talked about this with the athletic training room, you're educating them about the injury, you're educating them about the process to rehab them, and you're educating them about the context of the rehab process in the goal to bring them back to play. And it becomes, if you do ABC, you can do DEF, and that brings you to XYZ. I've said that like 20 times already, but it's so patently true in what we're talking about because you're setting goals and benchmarks for your person to return back to where they once were. You, and this is especially true when you have somebody who's just injured for the first time. They've never blown out a knee, they've never had a shoulder thing, they've never had an injury. And you have to be cautious about this in terms of like setting specifics because if you say by 2 weeks from now it'll be this, if it's 2 weeks will be that, but they're going to have setbacks. Your athletes will have setbacks when they're recovering. Your clients will be much the same, and you just have to give them some generalities and say this process will require you to work through a curve, and we're going to have some setbacks and you may have some issues, but here's my kind of overarching theme for what we're trying to accomplish over the next couple of weeks. For some people, depending upon their personality, they'll want those specifics, and you may have to guide them and say, look, I want to set some rough guidelines, but I don't want to set specific expectations just in case we have a setback. But let's just say 2 weeks from now, I would expect you should be able to do A, B, and C, right? And then 2 weeks after that, it's D, E, F. And then it becomes a conversation of how you're going to progress the person. And it's a case where you want the person to be vested, you want the person to have buy-in, you want the person to be motivated. And we already talked about how when people are asking questions or engaged in the process, they have greater psychological and emotional skin in the game, if you will, and they end up having a greater or more positive outcome in terms of their rehab process. But again, you have to be able to set the expectation and do it in a way where it's going to allow a little bit of wiggle room just in case. And it has to be realistic as well. So when you look at this, you kind of recover or outline the recovery process, and you kind of offer some benchmarks, but again, give them some wiggle room just in case. If we talk about this in terms of doing the actual programming itself, it might be range of motion. It might be something as simple as range of motion for the first couple of weeks, first couple of months. It might be a strength training program, and then we get back to your strength levels, and then you'll go back to wrestling. So, they just provide this. And what I like about this, it gets back to what I was talking about before, is when you return to wrestling, then you go into drill situations, then you start to slowly progress back to full contact. This is very much like the three-step process, and I noted there's like a little bubble in between step number 2 and 3, where it's okay, we're releasing you from the training program, from the training room, and you're going to be returned to play with some limitations as we ramp you back into full 100% practice. And that comes from good communication and conversation with your athletes, but also good communication and conversation with your coaching staff. And you have to be able to have those very real and strong conversations with your coaching staff. Otherwise, they're going to take their athlete, put them right back in full practice, blow them right out of the water, and that athlete's going to be right back in your training room, wrecked, and going through the same psychological and emotional baggage that they were before. It has to be a process where there's good communication. Digress. So you need some good psychological coping skills in terms of your psychological skills training. And, when you talk about rehab, prehab, we're talking about goal setting, positive self-talk and positive self-imagery, visualization to return to play. And there's also some relaxation training that has to be kind of developed to kind of bring down the negative self-talk and find ways to recognize self-talk quickly and then use coping mechanisms to minimize that and replace that with positive self-talk. Now, with athletes, they're pretty darn good when we start talking about goal setting. They can really embrace that process. And when you have goal setting and you combine it with strategies for enhancing self-efficacy and personal performance goals, this can really help to shorten the recovery times. And so they do a good job here, right here, of in this paragraph talking about how you can have, with injured athletes and exercisers, you have a date to return to competition. You determine a number of times per week to come to the training room for any therapy, etc. And I would say, look, if everything goes good, we can anticipate your RTP, your return to play, will probably be 2 weeks from now. But, let's give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room there just in case. And your athlete will normally go, okay, 2 weeks from now I'm in, I'm going to try to do it in a week and a half. I mean, that's how athletes are wired. But I would just tell you that you can put in, hey, we're going to shoot for 2 weeks, but we're going to have to give ourselves a little bit of room here because just in case we have a setback or just in case you do really well, we just want to be smart about this so you're actually not going to be back here for the rest of the season. And it becomes a conversation of just having good, proper training as well. So they talk about with strength and endurance exercises and recovery itself, and highly motivated athletes, much like they'll get it done in 10 days instead of 2 weeks, they tend to do more than is required and they can re-injure themselves. So you have to be pretty precise in terms of here's what I want for you to do today. Here are the things I want you to accomplish today. We can only work on what we're doing today in the moment. Please focus on these things and these things only. And then stick to this, stick to the plan, and we'll have you back probably in 2 weeks, give or take a couple days. And you're going to have good days and bad days, just so you know. And there will be setbacks, all right? If we're talking about a major injury and we're going through a rehab process, there's going to be some setbacks. We're going to have to work through them or around them. Take your pick. And we've already talked about what you should be doing in terms of training load, training volume, etc. But despite that, we may have a couple days where we just have to revisit some content that we worked on maybe on day 2. And that's just going to be inherent of our process of working together. So despite that, just know that's going to be part of the process. It shouldn't change your outcome or your outlook on this. You're still going to get back to play. You just still need to have a positive affect, right, and positive attitude towards recovery, and we'll overcome or we'll work around either one. In some regard, I would say you can't belabor the point that you're going to have setbacks because it could end up being self-fulfilling, but you want to just kind of set the seed, if you will, that is a possibility and we'll work around it. But I can tell you, when you start talking about people and their nuances and their psychological, emotional nuances, sometimes if they keep looking for a possible setback, they're going to find it, right? So it's just one of those things. You set the expectation on the front end and you don't belabor the point going forward. So you want some social support. And we already talked about how in the training room itself, everybody's there for the same reason, same purpose, and that's to put themselves back together. And usually there's a lot of camaraderie in that room in terms of like, you're doing great, man. You weren't doing that a week ago, or hey, nice job. What do you got going on? Or how'd you injure yourself? And there's a lot of conversation that happens amongst the athletes naturally, but also what needs to happen is a social support from the athletic training staff to the athletes. And then there should be some social support from the coaching staff to the athletes and some social support from the non-injured athletes to the athletes. And you can create that culture on your team. You can have players like your captains, or maybe you have team leaders or position leaders that, they'll go into the training room and see how their teammate is doing. How's your rehab coming? How you feeling? And, coming back soon, that you'll have those positive conversations with your athletes amongst themselves, and it creates this nice little safety net that you can have, and it's this social support that you have, and it's a wonderful way to have your athletes still feel valued. Now, if we look on page 503, we talk about different aspects of social support, and I'll just kind of let you guys read through this. If you want to pause me, they have that one and this one as well. We talk about the social support that can be fostered between the different populations. They also talk about how it on a continuum of rehab and return to play, you need social support all the way across that process. And then you need the social support itself when there might be setbacks, right? Or other things happen in life. So I really like how the book provides these right into a couple tight bullet points. I would take time to review those, maybe pause me and go back to that slide. There has to be a psychological component, which we talked about already, but you have to have your athletes physiologically capable, but then you have to set expectation regarding what they can do and what they can't do and what the expectations are regarding their physical wellness and physical readiness, but also their psychological and emotional readiness. Because you'll have some athletes who will be ready and they want to go back and they feel great and they're right back in the mix. And then you have others who will be fearful about going back, apprehensive that they've had a diminished skill capacity to perform their activity in the sport, or they're fearful that they'll re-injure themselves after going through this entire rehab process. And that's where you have to articulate to the coach, the coach and the athlete regarding how you would implement in return to play, or more accurately return to practice then to play, so you don't blow them right out of the water. And it's a case where you'll have other injured athletes who will say, oh my God, I went through that. I had that injury. It's totally not a problem. You'll just listen to what the trainer says and you'll be totally fine. They have a really good way of bringing you back to play. And it becomes a conversation of, we talked about a holistic approach, but that comes from a very strong network that's in place from all the different team components. And that's referred to as an interdisciplinary team, where you have different disciplines, the coaching staff for the sport, the particular sport position coach, if I can say it correctly. You have teammates who are supportive. You have people in the training room who are supportive. You have the training room staff who are supportive. And so you have a strong interdisciplinary concept that kind of offers this cohesiveness to your athletes to help your athletes return to play better, but also helps identify those individuals who may perhaps be in a higher stress environment, and they might have more higher state, if you will, stress, as opposed to situational stress. And those are individuals that you can help identify to minimize or at least reduce the possibility of injury. And your goal is to have basically your antenna up all the time to be able to know when an athlete might be feeling left out, might be feeling burnt out. Oh, geez. Oops, sorry, might be feeling burnt out, and be able to intervene on their behalf. All right, guys, I'm a little bit over, but I'm going to sign off right here.